My stepmom handed me a rusty key at my father's funeral and called it garbage. It erased her marriage and cost her everything. My stepmother handed me a single rusty key at my father's funeral and told me to enjoy my box of useless junk. 8 months later, I handed her a 24-hour eviction notice to the house she'd already started bragging about selling. She never saw the second moment coming, even though it was built entirely out of the first one. That's the end, though. Rewind 2 years, to a dinner table where I'd already gotten used to being the extra chair nobody quite wanted there. My name's Ryan. My mom died when I was 11, and 3 years later my dad, Robert, married a woman named Vivian, who showed up with a 5-year-old son named Tyler and a story about losing her husband in a car accident young. Dad had a protector streak a mile wide, and that story got him every time. He never once asked her to prove any of it. Why would he? Grieving widows don't lie about their dead husbands. Tyler got the new truck for his 16th birthday, private school, ski trips over Christmas. I got a 10-year-old sedan and a lecture about learning independence. Nobody ever said out loud that I mattered less. Nobody had to. I just noticed how my stomach tightened every time Vivian introduced Tyler as my son and me as Robert's son, like the difference needed underlining. Dad was an engineer, the kind of man who labeled his own toolbox and kept every receipt he'd ever been handed in labeled folders going back decades. Nothing he did was ever careless. If he left something behind, it was on purpose. I didn't understand yet how much that fact would end up mattering. Vivian never talked about her life before Dad. Ask about her hometown or her maiden name and she'd wave a hand and say, "Let's not dig up old ghosts, sweetheart," and everyone let it go, because grief makes people private. Once, a year before he died, Dad told me, out of nowhere, "This family isn't as simple as the photos on the wall make it look." I laughed it off. He'd had 2 glasses of wine. I didn't ask what he meant. I wish to God I had. He died of a heart attack at his office on a Tuesday, alone, and none of us got to say anything to him at all. At the will reading, Vivian and Tyler inherited the house, both cars, and the cash, all of it, without so much as a pause in the lawyer's voice. Then Vivian turned to me in front of the whole room, held out a single rusty key in a manila envelope, and said, "Your dad left you the contents of storage unit 402. Enjoy your boxes of useless junk, loser." A few people actually laughed. By the end of that year, I'd be standing on the porch of that same house, sliding a 24-hour eviction notice across a table, the same kind of table where she'd handed me that key and called it garbage. She'd be gone within a month, stripped of every dollar, every car, and a marriage that had never legally belonged to her in the first place. But right then, I was just a guy in a folding chair, staring at an envelope, with no idea what any of it meant yet. I drove out to the facility a week later mostly out of spite, expecting exactly what she'd promised me. Junk. I turned the key in the lock on Unit 402, and the door rolled up on something that didn't make any sense at all. The unit was almost empty. No boxes, no furniture, nothing of Dad's. Just one locked metal file box sitting alone in the middle of the concrete floor. The rental slip taped to the door listed the tenant's name as V. Ashford. I'd never heard that name in my life. I pried the lock off with a tire iron from my trunk, my hands not quite steady, some part of me already sure I shouldn't be doing this and doing it anyway. Inside were letters, a thick stack of them, tied with string. Not from my father. They were signed, Danny, full of the kind of language you don't write to a friend, dated years back and continuing well past the point Vivian had already been my dad's wife. Underneath the letters were bank statements from an offshore account, also under the name Ashford, going back nearly a decade. Some of the deposits matched, almost to the dollar, withdrawals I recognized from my father's own accounts. She hadn't just hidden a past. She'd been quietly bleeding him for years. At the bottom of the box was a marriage certificate. Vivian Ashford and a man named Daniel Pruitt, dated 5 years before she ever married my father. No divorce filing anywhere in the box. No death certificate. As far as any court in the country was concerned, She was still married to this man when she married mine. I sat in my car in that parking lot for a long time before I could make myself turn the key in the ignition. 3 days later I got a call from Dad's estate attorney's office, the wrong department, a clerical mix-up meant for Vivian's side. The house was already listed. The cars were already being appraised for sale. Once the estate closed and the assets moved, undoing any of it would get exponentially harder, and it was closing fast. I took the whole box to a probate attorney named Angela Reyes the next morning. She read through everything twice, then looked up at me and said the word bigamy like it was the easiest word she'd said all week. In this state, a second marriage entered while a prior one is still legally active is void from the moment it happened. Void marriages don't inherit anything. I actually laughed with relief in her office. I thought that was the whole story. That's when the real bombshell dropped. Angela's investigator tracked down Daniel Pruitt to confirm the marriage was never dissolved, and in the process found 3 more names. Vivian had been someone else's wife twice before that, under 2 other identities, always to men significantly older or recently widowed, always with money. Each marriage had ended abruptly, right around the time significant assets moved. One of those husbands had died suddenly in his sleep, and at the time, nobody had thought to ask a single question about it. Nothing pointed anywhere near proof of anything criminal. But sitting in that office, I stopped thinking of her as a woman who told one lie, and started wondering exactly how many times she'd done this before, and whether it had just happened again. Vivian and Tyler, meanwhile, had no idea any of this existed. They fast-tracked the house sale, already fielding offers over asking, already talking about which car Tyler would keep. We could close by the end of the month, I heard Tyler tell a friend on speakerphone once, not even bothering to lower his voice around me anymore. I expected, when this finally broke, that I'd be the one walking in with the folder, watching her face fall in real time. That's not how it happened. Buried in Dad's private files, the ones his attorney had been holding separately from the main estate, was a note in his own handwriting, along with a report from a private investigator he'd hired 11 months before he died. He'd found the bigamy himself. He'd said nothing to Vivian, changed nothing about their daily life, and quietly restructured his will so that one specific storage unit, and only that unit, would go to me, the one person he trusted to actually open a box instead of writing it off as garbage. The useless junk she'd mocked me with at his funeral was evidence he had placed there himself, on purpose, for me to find. He hadn't been fooled for one day of that marriage. He'd simply chosen his moment, and his moment was after he was already gone. Buried in the same file was something else. A paternity note, unresolved, questioning whether Tyler was biologically his at all, given how the timeline lined up with Daniel Pruitt. Dad had never pushed it while he was alive. He didn't need to anymore. At the probate hearing, Angela laid it all out at once, the marriage certificate, the offshore statements, the pattern of prior identities, right as Vivian's attorney was mid-sentence about fairness and years of marriage. "This is a lie," Vivian hissed at her own attorney, loud enough that the bailiff turned his head. "None of this is real, tell them it isn't real." Her attorney didn't answer. He was still reading the second page. If she'd taken a fair settlement instead of seizing everything and humiliating me with a rusty key on the way out, none of this might have ever surfaced. It was her own contempt that put the one piece of evidence capable of destroying her directly into my hands. The judge ruled the marriage void from inception, which made Vivian, in the court's own words, a legal stranger to my father. Legal strangers don't inherit. I was awarded the house, both cars, and the full estate, and her attorney's appeal attempt died within a week against paperwork that couldn't be argued with. I drove to that house myself and handed her the eviction notice in person, the same porch, the same kind of manila envelope. 24 hours, I told her, and I didn't feel the need to say anything else. Bigamy is a felony, and the police investigation that followed didn't stop at Daniel Pruitt. It pulled straight into the 2 other identities, and the sudden death nobody had questioned at the time. Tyler's version of his whole life came apart within the same season, the paternity question landing on top of losing every dollar he'd ever taken for granted. Daniel Pruitt himself surfaced during the investigation, stunned to learn where his still legal wife had actually been living the entire time, confirming details investigators hadn't even asked him about yet. The friends Vivian had spent a decade performing for learned everything within a matter of weeks. Investigators in 2 other states have reportedly reopened old files on her prior marriages, including exactly how one of those husbands died. Nobody said anything definitive yet. I don't think that silence means nothing. What stays with me isn't the house, or the money, honestly. It's realizing my father spent his last months quietly building a case he knew he might not live to finish, and trusted me, specifically me, to be the one who finished it for him. So tell me, was my father staying silent about what he knew, right up until he died, the cruelest thing he ever did to me, or the smartest thing he ever did for me?
If you have made it this far and want to see more videos like this, then kindly subscribe and turn on notifications so you may never miss another story like this.